So it was an Iranian independent film shot in black and white that felt kind of like a wannabe Quentin Tarantino movie at points. That was would make David Lynch just jealous of the long shots. It was really really cool the way they used the burqa for the vampire
Okay.
in the movie and everything, and you really kind of feel for all the characters, but it's an awkward I want to hold everybody at arm's length kind of thing, very suspenseful, and almost no blood whatsoever.
And what was it called again?
A Girl Walks Alone at Night.
Huh.
Everybody should see that movie. It was really good vampire entry.
Okay.
Hey everybody, welcome back. You are watching The Nerdening with
Ollamh.
Ollamh Productions and Outlander of the American Machine. And today we are talking about
Horror. Specifically, the general horror genre and how it's changed over the decades that we've seen.
I have a slightly interesting position because it was some of the first books I read were Stephen King books, because Mom left them laying everywhere. And so I might be a little warped in the head. But
Yeah,
my first interest in horror films was actually creating those special effects.
Okay.
And doing all of those, creating monsters. That's what I wanted to go into special effects for. And I
Makes sense.
still lament Stan Winston's death.
Yeah. Now, I have a little bit of history as far as horror movies. I'm kind of on the fence about them. I mean, now you can't do any kind of gaming videos these days without people pushing the horror genre. Particularly Slender Man, Five Nights at Freddy's, Vanish.
The creepypasta stuff.
Yeah, the real horror heavy stuff. And I've played horror games in the past, starting in about 1995 with Phantasmagoria from Sierra.
I only ever saw... my cousins had it, and I saw it very briefly on their computer, and it looked cool.
That was a great horror game because it wasn't all about jump scares, as so many games these days are. It was very psychological because each room, when you found out what the murder was, you actually kind of see the murder take place with your character as the victim. So she's reliving these deaths from the viewpoint of the victim.
A thing I just kind of vaguely remember, and I think, but I remember hearing this about Phantasmagoria. It was one of the first video games they actually hired psychologists to help them write it.
I think so, yeah. Now, I have actually played some games for my channel that are horror games. A big one was Vanish that I liked because, again, it was psychological. You're basically running around in these sewer tunnels.
Okay, like Sewer Shark?
And there's these monsters that, the sewer is changing all the time. So you run down a certain, you take a left, take another left, take a right, and you try and retrace your steps, and you're not going to end up at the same place again.
So forward is the only way to go.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Now, there are monsters that, you can see that will pop up suddenly. There are some monsters that you'll see them kind of tapping on the wall, and and basically you're hoping that they didn't see you. Because if they saw you, they're going to chase you. But yeah, I mean, it's so much better than... Like, Five Nights at Freddy's is another one that's just huge right now. They've got 3 games, they're making a 4th, they've got a movie deal for the frickin'
Really?
game. Yeah.
I haven't even played this game yet. I haven't even heard of it until you were playtesting it.
And it's... Well, no, I've never played it either. I've never played that one. I've never played that one. It's... I've seen people play it, and it's very... The first one had an original gameplay style. that was you're basically switching between different security cameras and, trying to keep track of these animatronics that will murder you. Basically, they think you're an animatronic without the fluffy outer coating, so they're going to stuff you into one of these suits. And it's all about jump scares. It is all about, okay, well, yes, there's suspense as far as, is it near the door? Do I have to close the door? The door consumes power when it's closed, and if the power goes out, all the doors open up. Still don't understand that. But the biggest scares are the jump scares when all of a sudden, one of them is leaping at you and you have this horribly loud mechanical scream in your ears, and that's what they're looking at to scare you, to make you jump.
And that's annoying. For me, that's just annoying. When suddenly I've got in my ears. If I can't see anything, that's not very scary. It's just annoying.
It's so many horror games these days we're gonna suddenly just shove something in your face and play a really loud sound, and that is horror.
What do I do when something jumps in my face? I punch it.
Yeah.
Or shoot it, or stab it, or whatever.
There actually have been people who have damaged their monitors from jump scares, and their initial reaction is to punch the screen.
They lack training.
From a gaming aspect, that's really I kind of have a problem with where the horror genre is going, and it seems kind of like it's doing that with some of the movies too.
Well, because I remember, through the 80s and the 90s, it died off in the 90s, but the whole, let's just throw buckets of blood in this thing. Let's throw some pussy effects in it. Let's be all slimy and slithery and weird and ooh, and let's just do it. All of those phobias. Let's stick them all in a movie.
It's really, they did really kind of focus on the phobias, on we are going to creep you out rather than startle you. So you mentioned Stephen King earlier, and I mean, like Stephen King's It. Yeah. From the 80s?
That was 80s.
80s or late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there.
It was late 80s.
But Stephen King's It, for so many people I know, so many people our age, that was one of the frightening movies of our childhood.
And Pet Sematary too was another one. Stephen King's kind of a
Yeah, but it wasn't. Hey, we're gonna, bright lights, frightening images, and loud sounds. It was the whole psychological aspect of it. Mm. What are your thoughts on where horror is these days?
I've seen some interesting movies lately, like the Tilda Swinton, Tom Hiddleston, Only Lovers Left Alive movie. Okay, so this movie was really cool because it really humanizes the vampires in the story, all played by amazing actors, and you don't see them as vampires, really.
But would that be a sign of a good horror movie, saying these monsters, these killers, are just like you? That's, for me, that's what
humanizing
really nails a good horror.
Yeah, a good humanizing horror the killer, giving them, hey, I'm here to do this for a real reason.
Not even so much for a real reason. They don't have to have a reason so much as something traumatic, something so traumatic as XYZ can turn anybody into this monster. This just killer.
On that, you're touching on a subject I would recommend anybody read The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. Everybody's capable of everything, and when we use monsters to codify the idea that it has to take something so much more to be able to be that horrible, but when you humanize that monster, you bring them down a little bit, and you realize that we're really looking in the mirror. Okay, another movie I really, really loved, and I remember when the trailers came out, but I didn't actually see it until my wife showed it to me, was High Tension. Was a French film. And one thing everybody remembers from the trailer was this scrawny, short-haired, blonde lady covered in blood carrying a concrete saw with those giant blades that are meant to, just saw through everything. And that was a psychological horror film.
Okay.
Very psychological. I really don't want to ruin it for anybody. It's an older movie, and I want you to see it because it was done really well. But we have an American student who is going back to the family farm with a French foreign exchange student to spend the summer in France or whatever. And then somewhere out there is a serial killer that comes to the farm and begins killing people. The twist is at the end, like any good horror movie, but it was done so incredibly well that you couldn't possibly think about it until they start showing you the how, the what happened during the movie towards the end of the movie.
Okay.
You gotta, like, it's what the movie is until you realize, oh, this.
Okay.
And then you go, and so you, in a way, it's a movie that makes you replay the entire movie in your head to go, oh wait, so they had to do this, or that was completely whatever. And one thing to mention about the progression of horror throughout cinema history has been, it's worth noting the Evil Dead series, the Army of Darkness, and it was horror that was meant to be horror, but it was so horrible that it was actually comedy.
Well, it was meant to be comedy from the beginning. Hey,
I
let's
think
face
so.
it.
Not the first one. Not the first one.
Yeah.
Not the. I don't know. It was a horror movie they were trying to insert comedy into.
It was too cheesy. It was too cheesy to not be.
But okay, so in that way, we're kind of talking about horror comedy at that point.
Yeah.
And no movie did the horror comedy better than the greatest homage. And it is an homage. It's not an original horror necessarily. Well, it is actually a very original horror in a lot of ways. But it uses all the other horror that's out there. Cabin in the Woods. That is a fun movie. Anybody who can stand horror should watch. Go see it now.
I find it kind of interesting that even they do the jump scares.
They did the jump scares, they did the buckets of blood, but they also, because they had the comedy interjected in there, it's hard to do comedy and suspense at the same time. So there was comedy, there was suspense, there was comedy, there was horror, there was, and there are a couple of moments in that make you kind of the same way they do in regular horror movies. But yes, if you want a good overview of what created the horror genre, the bits and pieces that went into the horror genre, that's a good movie for that. I would say that's a good index film.
Okay, so that's our thoughts on the horror genre in general. I'm kind of curious, what type of horror do you prefer? Do you prefer the suspenseful, kind of giving you that creepy, eerie feeling type of horror, or do you prefer the more in-your-face type of sudden startledness?
Babadook. I just remembered another one. Anyway.
So, yeah, what is your preferred type of horror?
And what do you like about the way that horror reacts with you? What is it about you that you think works with certain kinds of horror and doesn't work with certain kinds of horror? Because it is a broad genre for a reason.
Yeah.
So
lots of different people, lots of different styles.
Understand your fear.
As always, thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more from Ollamh Productions and
The American Machine. We'll see you next time.